All right, guys, back on Southeastern 16 with Max Barr. We are previewing the huge non-conference game on Tuesday between the Kentucky Wildcats and the Duke Blue Devils. That one's going to take place at 9 p.m. Eastern. That's going to be at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. And Max, this should be a great, great game, and we'll tell you all about it here in a second. I'll let Max, I know we don't have the odds yet, but we'll look at maybe some numbers and give you guys
Mhm.
an idea of how this thing could look in terms of the starting spread, those kind of things. Of course, if you want to bet on this game, you can do it at our friends at BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting. From the earliest in-game odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and ability to watch the games as they happen. Largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, NHL, UFC, MMA. It's all there. Head to BetOnline today. Get on the action. America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline. The game starts here. All right, Max, we're doing this on Monday morning, so we don't know the spread as it stands right now. But I know by looking at KenPom, those kind of things, thoughts on where this thing could settle, maybe?
I'm gonna say Duke minus 6.5. Bart
Ooh.
Torvik's got it minus 5.5. Ken Palm's got it minus 6, minus 7, I think. So I'll go with minus 6.5. I think people will be on Duke. Public more money will be on Duke than Kentucky. But yeah, probably a two possession spread. I'm assuming. You're gonna have a game against a defense in Duke that doesn't have a single player under 6'5". So we talk about all this shooting, this offense of Kentucky, how great the ball movement has been. You have back-to-back 100-point games to start the season, no matter who that's against. Impressive. But Blake, you're going to have length on the perimeter not seen yet.
Yeah. Is that so? If I had to give you one thing, like you're like, this is the thing that's the biggest key to this game without maybe giving away your prediction just yet. Like the first thing you look at as you go into this game is what?
The first thing I look at, well, it's the length, but it's 6'6" Proctor at the 2.
Yeah.
You know, like it's 6'6" Sion James bringing up the point. Like they're also defensively, Kentucky with Lamont Butler, with Otega Owe. How many minutes does Kirk Kriisa get in this game? Does he come out and maybe Sion James or Proctor or Con Knippel gets switched on to him, and Kirk Kriisa just doesn't have the size, to defend these guys. How does that matchup look? The size of Duke is going to influence the rotation of Kentucky, and that's what I'm kind of worried about.
Yeah, I think the size was the first thing that I had on my mind there in terms of looking at how this Duke team stacks up, and of course, it's not just the size; it's the skill too. It's the
Right.
combination of both, and I mean, this is just a ridiculously talented team in Duke, and Kentucky fans know that, as you again have seen this team so far. And we always say, like, what do you take away from the first couple games? Kentucky beat Wright State by 41. They beat Bucknell by 28. Duke beats Maine by 34. They beat Army, I think, what was it, 40, 42, something like that. So again, it goes back to the individual skill, and that's what we always say. Those are the things you can take away when you have this early schedule where you're playing teams you should beat by 30 plus or whatever. And so, yes, like that's the biggest thing. Like Cooper Flag, guess what? He's really good. We all know that. You keep going down the line, right? And you look at this team with Duke. But the thing is, with Kentucky, what has stood out to us so far, and we said it's just the way Kentucky executes. They're slicing and dicing. They're putting in things and running sets that are really hard to defend. And even with Duke maybe having, again, a size advantage and those kind of things, Kentucky is still going to put pressure on Duke here, I think, just from an offensive perspective. And like you mentioned, sure, you're going to have some questions about for Kentucky defensively. How do they stop all these guys? But I do think that is something where when we look at this, I know Duke's looked great defensively so far, right? But this is going to be a challenge because of the way
Mm-hmm.
Kentucky is playing offense. This is not the John Calipari era. Like if you're a Duke fan coming in and you're thinking about some of these previous games that they played against each other, where it kind of just became talent on talent. It's a little different here. Not that Kentucky can't match, talent wise in a lot of spots, but Kentucky is just running a lot more stuff. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Duke is able to defend. And of course, it all comes down to as well Kentucky, you got to make shots, like, period. They've been making shots at a very good rate, like you mentioned. Like, this is a big Kobe Brea type game, in my opinion.
Yep.
If you can get Kobe Brea open looks, he's got to hit those open looks to beat Duke because there's going to be a lot of points on the board here. So, a lot of interesting factors for me, but I do think, you can flip that storyline in the other direction and also say this is not going to be the easiest game for Duke to defend Kentucky either.
Mm-mm.
So,
no, and the other thing, Duke's pretty young. Duke's pretty young, so those complex defensive rotations, and I mean, you see some of the baseline out of bounds that Pope's drawing up and easy buckets and stuff like that adds up over the course of the game. Very tough to defend, and I bet you see some holes in Duke. And I listened to Jon Scheyer's post game after the Army game, and he was like, "We got holes. We still got some holes," and which most coaches would say right now. But yeah, how I think another big angle of this game that's going to have a huge factor on this game is the 1-2 punch of each center spot. Who wins that matchup? Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison against Maluash and Malik Brown. What tandem wins that matchup? Honestly, I think it's hard to predict because who do I trust more of the two starters right now, Amari Williams or Maluash? If you haven't seen this guy's 7'2", freakishly athletic, the real freaking deal. Amari Williams is 2 though, and he's a senior. And he's a little bit better offensively, a little bit more controlled offensively. I'll tip the hat to Amari Williams, but then the backup, Malik Brown, is fantastic. He was one of the most efficient players in the nation last year at Syracuse. I'll give him the edge coming off the bench over Garrison. I think that is going to be a absolute dogfight of a matchup. The 1-2 punches for each center spot is going to have a big impact on the game.
I think it's safe to say, like, Amari Williams, and I don't want to say surprise, like, maybe that's the wrong word, but, like, he's been the most impressive part so far, I think, for Kentucky in terms of, like, what our expectations were. Because we said this was an entirely new team, and we were going to see who were going to be the real standouts. Like, we knew based on past numbers and all that, like, he's a stud. But you wanted to see early on, okay, how is he going to blend in with all these other guys? But, like, he has just been, like we said, fantastic to this point. And another one where it's one thing to do these kind of things against the teams you played so far. It's another one to step up and do it against Duke. And I think that's the case for a lot of players here. And Jackson Robinson, too. Like, we've not mentioned him a lot, but I think if you take it to him, I mean, keep in mind, this is a guy, too, that what kind of game is this going to be? Like, who's the standout in this game? Kentucky probably needs Jackson Robinson to be the standout because if you look back at it, Max, I'm looking back through, obviously he comes from BYU and playing some games last year. Like, look at that game where they went on the road and beat Kansas, like, late in the season, right? He had a pretty good game there, like, scores 18 points in that game. And I think you start to see back at, like, he's been in these kind of games before. Like, he's been in some big games like this. And so they're going to need to lean on that because not a lot of guys necessarily on the roster for Kentucky have been in a lot of these kind of games, although people will say that and then look at, well, Lamont Butler was on a team that made it to the national championship. Kirk Kriisa has been in a lot of big games too. And I think that experience, to me, is something where if you're looking at this from Kentucky's standpoint, yes, like, there are guys on the Duke roster, like, look at Tyrese Proctor, like, okay, but you still got a lot of guys who are playing, like, just a very big game here in Game 3, as talented as all these freshmen are for Duke. In terms of, like, the big game experience so far, Kentucky has the edge there, and there's no question about it. And so I think when you use that, like, for those guys, Robinson and Butler and Kriisa, and you keep going down the line, right? Like, even the other guys that played in some big games. I mean, Andrew Carr, as we said, comes from Wake Forest. That's the one thing, too, that I'm curious, Kentucky can use that, I feel like, to really have a chance to win this game here.
Yep. And this is both teams' first game away from home. So if a few shots don't fall, in the first 5 minutes, do we start thinking, oh no, we can't shoot here, and all this, it starts to pile on each other as the stress of the game evolves. But one more thing, just looking at Army and Maine, they don't have any size. Army doesn't have a guy over 6'8". Maine plays a little bit of a guy 6'10", got a guy off the bench that gets a little bit in 6'10". Duke's going to be playing against 6'11 Andrew Carr, 6'10 Amari Williams, who plays like he's 7 foot. So how's Cooper Flagg's efficiency in his first game against a legit rim protection defense? Does his efficiency drop? Is he not able to bully his way to the rim as much? What does the Duke offense look like when they can't get to the rim as easily? Those are also some questions that we don't know. Last year they had Jeremy Roach to, kind of bail them out a lot late shot clock situations. Tyrese Proctor and Foster can handle the load at point guard, and so can Con Knipple, but it's not like a true shot creating, shake and bake, quick point guard. So, if Amari Williams is swatting some shots, Andrew Carr swatting some shots, and they can't get to the rim as quick, how does that change the Duke offense? There's a few questions that are, still posed here that I feel like just kind of, looked over because they're so talented. If that makes sense.
All right, let's get to picks. My pick is just watch the game. I know people are going to they're going to go wild over whatever we pick here, but I think this is one of those games early on where enjoy it, because this is a fantastic matchup. And I think, again, we would have probably said that in previous years too, but I think when you feel what Mark Pope has injected into this Kentucky program in terms of their offensive structure makes this so much more exciting, in my opinion, because I think you're looking at a game where I would be stunned unless what you just brought up, Max, let's say both teams come out and they just can't hit a shot. Maybe Kentucky, the shots aren't falling. That could be a problem against Duke because they're going to score. But this should be a fun game. And the difference between, talk about the difference between Maine and Army and Kentucky, of course. Kentucky gets up and down the floor. They're getting up down the floor, the ball movement. Maine and Army, more half-court type teams. So again, I think that's another difference, just aside from the other obvious ones. But Max, thoughts? We can't put the Southeastern 16 kiss of death on anyone because Chris isn't here to give us the triple in terms of the picks, but picks for this one.
Yeah, so obviously Duke's going to be favored by probably 2 possessions. I'll pick Duke to win the game. I think that Duke has a little bit more of a path to inside scoring. I know I just was talking about Andrew Carr and Amari Williams. If they are stout, that could completely change this game. But I think with Flagg, with Malik Brown, Malawash, and just their size down low, I trust if the shots aren't falling for Duke, I trust that they're going to find a way to consistent offense still. If the shots aren't falling for Kentucky, I haven't seen what that looks like yet. Because they've just been shooting the lights out, right? So I'll go with Duke to take the win for there. But I really think, I know we always talk about the defense of Lamont Butler and Owe, but if Carr and maybe even a little bit of Almanor, but if Carr and Williams can really protect the rim, that could change this game.
All right, Max, I'm not surprised that you picked Duke because I think a lot of people are going to pick Duke in this game. As we said, we mentioned earlier, didn't know if the spread was out yet. I think now I actually have been able to find it. I think it opened at 6. You're seeing it 6.5 in some places. I see it 7.5 in a couple other places. I don't know how valid that is, but here's the thing. Like we said, it's the first big test for Duke in terms of these freshmen, but it's also the first big test for Kentucky with all these new guys together, and they've looked fantastic so far. Duke is a 6 to 7 point favorite, whatever you want to do. I'll probably pick Duke to win this game, but I will also give you the reasons why. I think there are some people out there that look at this and feel like Duke is just going to maybe run away with this game. I think the reasons why I'm just not so sure about that are because when you do look at Kentucky and the ball movement, we said those kind of things, Duke defending the 3 here, if Kentucky shoots it well, it's going to be a challenge. But, also on the same side, we know just with this Duke team, and I mentioned kind of the experience thing too, Max, yes, Kentucky probably has more experience in terms of age, but when you do look at some of these guys, what's that mean for a Cooper Flagg type guy, right? Sure, he hasn't played a lot of college games, but he's still just an absolute stud, of a freshman. And so do we lean too far in that direction? Again, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few hiccups with Duke early on just because they are, leaning on a lot of young guys, and that's where, Kentucky comes out. I think the first 5 to 8 minutes of this game will tell us a lot because if Kentucky can come out, make some shots early, and withstand, again, what I think is going to be a bit of an offensive onslaught from Duke, even as good as Kentucky is defending on the perimeter. I think that's big here because you don't want to see Kentucky come out and, let's say, start 1 of 8 from 3, because then I
Uh-oh.
think that's
Uh-oh.
just you're right. If you're playing catch up against this Duke team, I feel like that's a problem. But you could also, same situation here. You could say, well, it's a problem for most teams, but if Kentucky gets hot, look out, right? Like they can make up those kind of points. Again, I think this is one where you probably want to see. I mean, Duke was a top 5 preseason team, whatever, top 3 for some people. You want to see Kentucky win this game maybe before you're going to pick them to do it. And we've always kind of used that thinking here. But man, this is such a fascinating matchup the more you look at it. And I would not be surprised if Kentucky wins this game. Also, wouldn't be surprised if Duke flexes their muscle here
Yeah.
and just says, "Hey, here's why we're as good as we're going to be this year, because look at these stud freshmen and look at what we have around them." So,
Blake, I always like to make my comparisons to my other sports that I like to watch. I'm a big UFC fan, as you know. This Duke team, Blake, is the undefeated prospect. Okay, that has just been flying through, the regional scene. Oh, everyone likes this big prospect.
the regional scene.
That's a UF, yeah. But they haven't been asked those questions, right? Duke didn't trail at all against Maine. They only trailed for like 1 second against Army. What happens in the second half if they're up by 6 at halftime and then Kentucky comes out and makes 3 threes in a row and they're down by 3 in the second half? You start looking around. What's going? Could be interesting here. Could have a heavyweight on the ropes. We'll see. It's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Kentucky fans also, like in the back of their mind, you're being optimistic here. You're also thinking of like that 118 to 84 game, whatever, several years ago, and you're like, oh boy, like could Duke do that? I don't see that happening here. But again, this is a very
Oh,
high-powered Duke team, but it's also a very high-powered Kentucky team, as we've talked about in videos over the past couple of weeks now. If this offense can get going, if they can get the shots they want, how does Duke defend the 3 here? I think that is a very big part, of this game, especially against this Kentucky team. That could wind up being the story. We'll find out. Max, should be a fantastic game. Enjoy this one, everyone, because you don't get many like this, I think, during the season. Yes, it's going to be a lot of great conference games and all that, but I think just the matchup, these kind of teams and the way they play, this is going to be a lot of fun. So we will have it all covered here at Southeastern 16 as always, guys. So be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button as well. Even if you don't like the fact that we're picking against your favorite team, if you're a Kentucky fan, we did give you kind of the Southeastern 16 kiss of death, Max, if you think about it. Even though Chris is not here, we got you sort of a miniature version of that. So
I'll tell
us
you what.
picking against
Whether
usually
you
works
whether
okay.
you hate us, you hate our pick, or you love our pick, come and tell us in the reaction because we'll be here.
Yes. We'll be doing it most likely live on Tuesday night right after the game. So hop on in. We'll talk about whatever happens here in a great matchup. Duke, Kentucky, Catlanta going down on Tuesday night. So we appreciate you guys watching as always, and we'll talk to you again here soon at Southeastern 16.